As promised, let's bring in Pulitzer Prize-winning tax reporter David K. Johnston, the author of Free Lunch, How the Wealthiest Americans Enrich Themselves at Government Expense and Stick You with the Bill. He's also a columnist for Tax Notes. David, thanks for your time again tonight.
Thank you, Keith.
First of all, have we explained what's going on correctly, and can you flesh it out a little bit for us?
Everything you said was correct, and it's actually much worse than this because in addition to being pass-throughs, many of these enterprises benefit from all sorts of tax rules that allow them to take money now and then pay their taxes 10 or 20 years in the future. That's an enormous benefit and a subsidy that ordinary working people who have their taxes taken out of their paycheck before they get it are in effect financing for these businesses. In addition, about 900 of these small corporations, it looks like from the statistics, paid no income taxes even at the personal level of the owner.
When we think about small businesses colloquially, or as we would say, using English, we think of the mom-and-pop hardware store. We think of some online company that's run out of somebody's home. Some employee somewhere is trying to break out on his own and starts his own company selling the proverbial widget. Are any of those kinds of businesses in the range that Republicans are trying to protect in their supposed so-called benefits for so-called small businesses?
Well, Keith, yes, there are some. I mean, you can have an author. Maybe my next book, I'll make enough money to come under your opprobrium for it.
Yep.
There are people who may own a chain of fast food stores or a particularly successful group of liquor stores, but they're a very small portion of this. There are about, as you mentioned, 15,000 S-corps that have an average revenue of $150 million, and then there's another 18,000 partnerships that have average revenue of about $137 million.
These rich guys, though, paying the top rates, they'd have to pay a lot more in taxes if the Democrats don't renew the top Bush tax cuts, right?
Well, yes and no. They do, after all, have access to tax shelters. There are all sorts of fine rules. The reason the tax code is so thick has nothing to do with ordinary Americans. It has to do with favors bought with campaign donations. But yes, overall, they will pay higher taxes, which will go to provide better infrastructure so they can move their goods and services, educate people so they have people to buy their products, etc.
Just putting aside for a second the Orwellian quality of this whole thing, that peace is war and big business is small business. In terms of hiring, regardless of the size of business, the GOP argument is that raising taxes would curtail new jobs, would curtail hiring. Is that really the biggest factor, or don't businesses wind up deducting those costs in any case from their own taxes and their own expenses?
Well, economic theory says there should be less job creation when we raise taxes. Well, Bill Clinton had Congress raise taxes in 1993, and 8 years later they were cut, and again 10 years later under President Bush. During Bush's 8 years, 3.5 million jobs were created. During Clinton's years, 6 times as many, 21 million jobs. In fact, during the Clinton years, more jobs were created in those 8 years than in the 20 years of Ronald Reagan and both Bushes in the White House. So I think you have a tough time making that argument. What matters is what the taxes are spent on.
Last question. Is there law or code somewhere that defines what a small business is? Is there actually just a semantical violation here, or is there something more to it?
No, this is essentially semantical. I mean, the SBA says if you have 500 or fewer employees, you're a small business. So certainly by the definition of the Small Business Administration, many of the companies that we've talked about are not small businesses. And remember that small businesses also destroy many jobs. It's a relatively handful of little companies that go on to become big companies. The gazelles, they're known as, like, say, FedEx, that went from nowhere to being a big company very quickly.
David K. Johnston, professor at Syracuse University, great thanks for your time tonight and for your help on all of this.
Glad to be here.